Hi everyone. My guest today is a professor of anthropology and sociology. He received his bachelor degree in sociology from Sakarya University, his master's degree in history from Boğaziçi University, and his PhD degree in anthropology from the University of Western Ontario, Canada, in 2009. Besides his experience in research, Professor Ramazan Aras worked as a founding chair of Anthropology Department at Mardin Artukulu University from 2010 until 2017, and he started to work as a founding chair of Sociology Department at Ibn Khaldun University in 2017 and until the moment. Some of his works are The Formation of Kurdishness in Turkey, Political Violence, Fear and Pain, which is published in 2013, Crossing Borders, Socio-Cultural Anthropology and Interdisciplinary Approaches in Turkey, which was published in 2014, and finally, The Wall, The Making and Unmaking of Turkish-Syrian Border, which was published in 2020. Professor, it's so lovely to have you today, and we welcome you in Tanween.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
So, many scholars have personal stories that have either sparked their interest to engage in scholarly work or even shaped the topics they have worked on later. And looking at the topics you have worked on, I'm sure you have this aspect to you. So why don't we start by you walking us through your personal story and how this shaped your interest and the kind of topics you worked on afterwards?
Okay. Thank you very much again for having me here. Actually, I have been thinking in different times about this issue, why I am focusing on this issue, or what have I done scholarly in this way. And of course, I generally agree with this idea that our personal stories are attached to our academic journeys as well. So it is too much connected with each other. So in my story, I will say one of the starting point was the social and the political climate that I was born into, which was in the southern eastern part of the country, Turkey, and it was in the city of Mardin. And where I was born into this climate of violence and fear and terror in the late 80s as a child, of 8, 9, 10 years old, let's say. So I would say those kind of have a starting point in my personal journeys to question different issues in my life, the idea of who am I, and the idea of where I am located, and the idea of the state or the movement or terror or the violence, etc. And of course, those kind of early childhood experience later was combined with my early intellectual journeys, in which during high school I met Ali Shariati, I would say. So I can very comfortably say that my early readings in high school about Ali Shariati, the Iranian sociologist and Muslim thinker scholar, had a deep impact on me, on the way to engage more in social sciences, but on the other hand, to think about yourself, to think about the other, to think about the ummah, to think about different issues that is not only related to me as an individual, but also in the larger context, the Muslim ummah, or the question of who we are as Muslims. So that was a kind of sharp, I would say, starting point. I would say radical starting point. In that age, asking those kind of questions, I think sometimes it wasn't fair to me to be that much exposed to those kind of, I would say, radical concerning the mainstream Turkish and the Kurdish society. I would say radical ideas to put yourself in a very early age on the margin. So this is the point of myself, to feel in the margin, and not only as a man, as a young person. And I should say that my ethnic background has a deep impact on my journey as well. You know, being Kurdish put you automatically on the margin in that dark years of the modern Turkish history, 1990s, which was full of immensely episodes with the state violence, state terror, and the terror and the violence of the Kurdish movement. Living in between somehow, or being an observer in between, was automatically putting you on the margin, on the periphery. And of course, it was not only geographical locality of being on the margin, it was also being self on the margin as well.
How so?
And in the high school years, that marginality was combined with being through this Islamist journey. So being an Islamist and in the same time being Kurdish. So it was a kind of double consciousness or double I would say two-layered, positionality, both intellectually and also ethnically, to feel as the other or to feel on the margins of the state, both epistemologically and ontologically and politically. So I think that me being in the margin wasn't only a push from the power, from the state or the mainstream state ideology. I think I liked it also. It was my choice as well. I could locate myself somewhere in the center, negotiating with power or institutions, but I didn't want to. It was my also personal preference not to have a negotiation with the hegemon or with the power, to be on the other side, the side of the oppressed, I would say. So I think I would say it wasn't a de facto kind of positionality. It was also a conscious positionality of positioning of myself on the margin and reading the epistemic ground and ontological ground of the society and the state and all other issues from the margin. So I think that gives you more freedom also. This is what I feel always also. You are not bounded, you are not chained with certain institutional regulations or this or that. So I think being there gives you also a certain sense of more freedom.
So in a way, you were not just marginalized, but you came to appreciate being on the margins because it allowed you to see things in different ways.
Exactly. So because any negotiations with the power, with the center, or any agreements will start a certain process of alienation or intoxication process or weakening process, I will say. So because you don't have that power to negotiate, you are under the manipulation or exploitation of the state power and its apparatuses as a Muslim, with your identity, with your position. So that's why me being in the margin and always asking those troubling questions. So I think I like that part of Ali Shariati too much, to be the troublemaker wherever you go. In the class, in the conferences, in a meeting, in a student house. So I wasn't fitting to, I would say, not any forms and categories that was also imposed on me by the Muslim Jama'as or other associations. I have been always an independent figure in my life, and that gives you a certain form of loneliness, I would say, not being organically associated with a institution or a Jama or a social political movement.
It gets lonely.
You feel lonely, but as I said, again, I think you like it, and your mental and intellectual mindset put you in such a position. And after a while, you recognize that actually that location in the margin feeds you also. And helps you to recognize who you are, to investigate the issues that are completely out of the mainstream framework. So I think that is the power, or that is maybe the power that I derived or generated from
Right.
that locality, I would say.
Speaking of negotiating with the power, especially from a scholarly position, you worked as the founding chair in two different anthropology departments. Now, in our part of the world, be it the Muslim world, the Arab world, the global south, even, anthropology traditionally is conducted, anthropological research is conducted by Western academics,
Yeah.
and even the research that is conducted by locals is not very much appreciated by the governments and sometimes even attacked. They are perceived as dangerous. And in your experience, establishing two different departments of anthropology in two different cities in Turkey, what is the value of this for you? And why is it important to have anthropology of our own?
First of all, my engagement, I will say, with anthropology came a little bit later. I was more sociology oriented during my not only high school years but later also. I studied sociology, and that was a critical perspective on understanding of different aspects of the society, and in relation to what I have said earlier, being from the margin, in that sense, gave you power to question other marginalized groups, entities within the society. So in that context, when I decided, for instance, this is too much associated with later in my relationship with history, for instance. The history teaching in Turkey is too much conventional, and it is too much associated with nationalist frameworks, even today. But when I was in touch with some scholars at the Department of History at Boğaziçi University, I have seen that the liberal ground, I would say, in the department, in the campus of the university, which provided me to meet with the whole genre of the oral history. So again, my critical positionality collided with my engagement with oral history, and through that journey, so I would say I generally have found this oppositional localities in my intellectual journey and also academically. So from a critical sociological position, then I moved to a critical oral history position to question the whole the question of historiography, and not only modern Turkish history, starting from my family history, who am I, and then the national history, and also Islamic history. What I have been taught in the context of the history was under the scrutiny. So that is how I started to engage with other ethnic and religious minorities in Turkey who have been pushed and to the corner and marginalized. So that positionality ended up me engaging with anthropology. So when I if you ask me, whether I will do a PhD in anthropology when I was doing my undergraduate years, I will never imagine such thing. But this critical engagement smoothly directed me to anthropology, and the first step of my engagement in anthropology was Talal Asad, of course. So while doing MA, my early readings of Talal Asad automatically convinced me that I should move to that direction. And of course, when you come to the question of anthropology, both historically, as you know,
The colonial history of anthropology.
it's a colonial, I would say, academic discipline in the past.
Yes.
But interestingly, in different aspects in the history of anthropology, the discipline moved to a more critical and oppositional, context throughout the history, particularly I would say in the 1960s with the impact of the feminist movement and the black movement and then the Marxist movement that globally engaged in different parts of the world. So anthropology from a colonial agent or discipline moved to a more critical counter state, I would say, positionality in the larger context.
Counter hegemony in general.
Counter hegemonic positionality. So that was something that, again, I found myself more comfortable in the framework of the social sciences, comparing to, and this global history of anthropology is very resonating in the history of anthropology in Turkey also. So when you look at the history of the discipline in the country, you will see that how the discipline is actually being marginalized by the founders of the state in the 1920s and 30s.
Why so?
So because of the fact that anthropology is asking questions about diversity, about cultures, about margins, about the other, and investigating who is the other. So this investigation of the other, also gave recognition to the other through the scholarly engagement. And remember, we are being taught that the Turkey is composed of the Turks, and that the state is founded on the Turkish history, the whole myth of the Turkish historiography, language, culture, and memory and social setting. So under such Kemalist Unitarian state ideology, anthropology was not allowed to born. Rather than that, what was allowed was more physical anthropology, biological anthropology.
And archaeology.
And interestingly, when you look at the history of anthropology in Turkey, the founder of the country, Mustafa Kemal, through his own readings, recognizes that the Turks were put as an ethnic origin and identity, they were put under the category of Asian as a race rather than Caucasian. So according to the story, he was too much disturbed by the literature about this, and he encouraged his stepdaughter, Afet Inan, to go and do a PhD in Switzerland and working one of the leading anthropologists of the time in that period, and to prove that the Turks are also under the Caucasian race as an ethnic group. And she came back to the country by measuring more than 60,000 skeletons and this and that through physical, biological, anthropological investigations, and ending the thesis with the thesis that the Turks also fell under the Caucasian race and the subcategory of Alpine race. So that was something that was allowed. So when you look at the history of the discipline in the country, rather than sociocultural anthropology or linguistic anthropology, physical and biological and archaeological aspects were allowed to develop and spring within the social sciences. So that is why the anthropology itself has been marginalized in the country, for it is sociocultural anthropology, particularly for it is premises that are counter-narrative of the state ideology. So that is why and that is why there is a huge interest among many young networks in Turkey to study anthropology for that political reason also. And that is why when I came back from Canada after completing my PhD, when I was asked by the founding rector of the Mardin Artuklu University, Serdar Bedi Omay, that I should come and found the department in Mardin, I was too much impressed, and I feel a huge responsibility.
You were surprised.
And I feel too much responsibility to that I should take this mission. I should do something for the development of the discipline in the country also. So that is why I immediately accepted the job offer.
Especially, it was in Mardin.
And the context, the socio-political, cultural context, it was one of the most beautiful setting to start a project, such a project, and bring people, academics and scholars together, and to start this academic journey in such a context. So that is why I was too much happy, I would say, to be a part of beautiful story, I would say. And later, when I was offered a job offer at Ibn Khaldun University, I feel the same feeling again. I was coming to not an anthropology department, a sociology department, but with my both baggage and more gravity in anthropology, of course. So that is why when you look at the character of the department today, we have this hybrid, I will say, character. We combine, and this is something that we actually deeply concerned about in relation to the issue of interdisciplinarity. So rather than focusing on sociology and sociological literature, we want to include anthropology and political science and literature and other history and Islamic studies in order to have this more grounded epistemic, foundation that students can benefit from it, and also we ourselves to develop ourselves also in such a framework.
You cannot just focus on one field when understanding
exactly,
a certain
and
issue
this
or
is
topic.
something that we want to encourage as much as possible, and feed our own undergraduate and graduate students with such a perspective.
Especially that you yourself have a multidisciplinary background, doing sociology, then history, then anthropology, and you could find main and major common themes between them. And speaking of that, I want to ask you about the significance of focusing on the living experience of the people that you are studying. For example, when talking about the issue of borders or nationalism or borders in relation to nationalism, usually, or at least traditionally, it's discussed more within the circle of researchers on national security, even development. But what is the significance of studying such a topic, such as border experience, living by the border, and nationalism through the living experiences of people?
I would say the question of borders and nationalism are maybe two most critical issues. Not only in today's Middle East context, but in the larger context globally. So when my understanding of the border or my understanding of a partition in that sense is too much associated with also my personal experience. I was born in a border city, and as I said earlier, my personal stories and family history is too much associated with my scholarly engagement as well, and I think this is very common in academia as well. So
why is it important to focus on the living experience of the people instead of just discussing it as a matter of national security, for example? Of course,
this is what I am saying. So this is one of the, I would say, most critical issue in anthropology. So we are talking about humans. We are talking about living humans with their own experiences. And in this context, we are not talking about numbers, which in certain contexts, and sociology talks about numbers in population, in demographic studies. So this is one of the most critical aspects of the anthropology as a critical discipline that look at the meanings and everyday life experiences of the people, and how life is being settled through these experiences. So that is why fieldwork and participant observation and being engaged with the people in their everyday life is very critical for understanding of the social phenomena. So this is one of the must methodological condition on principle in anthropology, you know, to be with your interlocutors, to live with your interlocutors, and to be a part of their life in order to have a deeper understanding of what they are doing, what they are living, how they are doing. So that is why rather than going and sticking to a meta-narrative or a kind of conservative or conventional or pro-statu quo kind of positionality, one of the most important aspects of this critical engagement to move to the other side of the border, to move to the other side of the story, to move to the other side of the context and try to make invisible visible. So that is why in my all scholarly engagements, I always have given too much value to this personal attachment and immersion in the field, to be in touch with the people, to touch their life and to be with them in order to understand, speaking their language, for instance. Sharing their cultural values, being in everyday life in order to have a deeper and more comprehensive and comparative aspects and analysis of what is going on there. So that is why in the border studies and the projects that I have conducted and completed in the past was too much associated with this positionality in the field. So my first and last journey to Syria was in the border town of the Kamishlo, for instance, and visiting my aunt there with my mother. So my personal story, being grown up with the stories of the border and relatives who are being partitioned and on the other side of the border in Syrian side, have always feeded that curiosity from the childhood period. What is there? Who is there? What's going on there? So, and when you look at my memory and the memories that I investigated, here and there was not also cartographically imagined. When I was talking with the local people, for instance, there was no geographical division in the mindsets. Like, you are here, you go to that town, but that town is on the other side of the border, but the border itself is generally was not mentioned, particularly in the narratives of the elders. Because in their memory, in their cartographic imagination, there wasn't such border. It was the Ottoman legacy. It was the memory of the past. So, but somehow in the 1920s, some people decided on something which is called border officially between Syria and Turkey. And then that decision that was made on the table slowly in the 50s started to become visible and have a huge impact on the lives of the people.
It's not only Turkey and Syria, it's the story of borders in the Middle East in general.
Exactly. So to take the issue to the larger context from a sociological and anthropological perspective, I think what through my own research, what I have been trying to do is to question the whole this issue of bordering, within the societies, between the societies.
Not just as a matter of national security.
Exactly. So no, going beyond this and how the whole idea of the national security is a fabrication of the state and state apparatuses and the hegemonic powers in order to control and rule the masses. So it was what I have been trying to say, actually, to question this taking granted fabricated narratives about border and bordering as taking granted entities, which they are not. These are made, and we are put or pushed into this made world. So one of the starting and the critical point to question this border and bordering mechanisms, and to what extent they are real, and to highlight their fakeness, their violent nature that actually divide people, tribes, communities, jama'as in different parts of the world. So it is something to re-question the whole modern nation state. It is a scholarly engagement to question the border and the bordering mechanisms as security, state security, state sovereignty, oriented questions that are actually not
through
our
the actual
own.
living experience of people.
Exactly. So these are fabrications of the modern nation state that are imposed on masses, where masses are made to convince the value or the need for such mechanisms.
I think
So
people living by the borders are the best example of what living experience can explain to us. Things like nationalism, for example. We don't just have to read about it in political philosophy. You can actually study such a topic through listening to the stories of the people that have experienced nationalism in a very severe way.
exactly,
They have seen it happening.
like one of my concluding remarks throughout my research, that how the border and the bordering mechanisms are becoming tools, violent apparatuses in the hands of the state, not only to exclude the other, but also homogenize and assimilate or alienate the one that is captivated internally.
Especially with colonial history, for example, when it
Exactly.
comes to the Arab world.
Exactly. So and there is another emerging new phenomenon in this security statu quo oriented bordering strategies of and tactics of the state, is too much related to the question of refugees and migrants. So the world is heading into to a direction in the near future, and actually we are today starting to experience it, that masses are being captivated and enslaved within this bordering mechanisms. So in today's context, nowadays we are talking about Gaza, right?
Yes.
Gaza as a camp that is completely surrounded by the colonial terrorist, regime.
Actual
A settler.
settler colonial power happening in front of everyone.
Exactly. So, but what is happening in Gaza actually is happening in other parts of the world slowly. So, the modern nation state are, by putting extra measures and security and checkpoints physically and technically on the borders, not only in the territorial borders but also on the sea borders, is completely not only excluding the other who wants to take refuge, but also internally enslaving and incarcerating the so-called citizen as an obedient one. So this is a very dangerous I would say, direction for the humanity and for the whole question of the freedom or the question of the self in the near future. So we are kind of being captivated within the so-called national territorial security borders. And now we are nowadays witnessing the rise of the borders, security walls and fences. So in my recent, one of my recent work on the Turkish-Syrian border, I am questioning the Turkish security wall. You know, it is after Great China and wall and the Mexican-US border, the Turkish security wall is the third largest wall in the world.
Wow.
And Turkey has completed also another portion of the security wall between the Turkish-Iranian border also. So so when you look at those examples, and this walling states phenomenon is increasing globally. So that reality and ongoing I would say issues are asking us and pushing us into that direction to think about the future of migrants and refugees also in the world. Whether there will be such category even in the future, if you are by any means not allowed to move all your mobility potentiality, if it is prevented, where to escape, where to go. This is exactly what is the dominant feeling among the Palestinians in Gaza, where to go.
I think I thought of this while you were talking about the living experience, because I thought of how many people in Gaza have been expressing this sentiment and saying we are not numbers. They in a way they want to say that, well, we have a living experience, we have a story, we have details,
Exactly.
and these things are important. It's not just up for your security measures, or it goes beyond everything. The personal story, the personal trajectory, the details of a single life. And you could see that many people in Gaza are saying that, and I think they say it in this simple way, but also very strong way of saying we are not numbers.
Exactly.
We have a living experience here.
And you know, one of the leading figures of that idea, which was transformed into a kind of an intellectual journey and also a movement, an activism, was led by the professor. He was one of the leading figure of this discourse of that we are not the numbers. And Professor Rifat Al-Harir, you know,
yes.
have paid this with his own life, you know, while voicing this, that we are living humans. We have a family, we have children, we have brothers and sisters, we have fathers and mothers, we have cousins. We are living humans that are exposed to such violence and terror and genocide. So this has been one of the crucial point in my scholarly engagement, you know. When I studied on border, when I studied on Muslim Armenians, for instance, when I studied Muslim and Christian relationship in my MA thesis, for instance, which I conducted fieldwork also not only in Mardin but in Sweden. Later, when I worked on the Kurdish question, and in the 1990s, and how state violence and terror, you know, influenced the lives of the ordinary people.
Yeah.
And later, in the last 4 or 5 years, I am working on the single party regime era in modern Turkish history. So when I listen elders, first and second generation, who survived this authoritarian era, single party era, one of the shocking moments for me to hear the voices of those individuals who are telling me their stories
It gives you a
in
different perspective.
tears and pain and crying. So when you look at the modern Turkish history, again, what the meta narrative or the status narrative will tell you is more about numbers.
But you also have organized events before educating the public and your students on events like Nakba, for example. And I think it has to do with your understanding of the importance of oral history and sharing these stories.
Exactly. So this is something I think that we are too much missing in social sciences, both in our philosophical and theoretical engagement. When you talk about social phenomena, when you investigate any issue in the social sciences, to what extent you are in touch with the people, to what extent you are in touch with the streets, to what extent you are immersing yourself in the everyday life experience of the people, to go down and be there and sit with the people, talk with the people, and let them to their voices to be heard from by the outside world. So this is something also, not from a scholarly perspective, this is not something to be authentic or to be so-called quote unquote objective, or reaching the haqiqa in your scholarly investigation. This is also too much associated with a point of activism. How justice can be settled for everyone, because the question of justice in every single social work or in every single scholarly work has to be taken into consideration.
Yeah.
This has been something that I too much valued in my intellectual journey and in my academic journey. So when in any scholarly engagement that I have been doing, this is one of my main concerns, whether whatever I am doing in every single project, what is my position as a professor, as a researcher? How do I locate myself in that setting? Am I violating someone's right? Or through this project, am I serving an oppressor or a violent figure? How my data is going to be, whether my data is going to be abused or used negatively by some others. So this is something, of course, very critical and difficult, but you have to put this into consideration. At the end of the day, what is the reason for doing such research?
Yeah.
Are you doing this research for your academic career, to get a position, to be acknowledged in the society, to be paid well in such a position? Or is this something that you do to reach haqiqa in every aspects in your life?
To keep your compass in check.
As a Muslim, I see, and as a Muslim intellectual, as a Muslim academic figure, I see this as a responsibility for the other. So it is not an academic business. This is not an academic engagement. This is a mission also, that as a Muslim I feel, and I feel it, and in the bottom of my heart, that I have to do something. For these people, to help them, that their voices will be heard by the outside world, and that academic scholarship can be a part of justice building or justice settling, the process. I think this is something that we always need to keep in mind as academic figures, also at universities, in our campuses also, and working and being a part of such a labor in our engagement as well.
Let me ask you about a connected but a different area that you have also worked on. Aside from focusing on borders, you also engage and teach courses on anthropology of Islam, anthropology of secularism. Now, these topics are not usually discussed from the perspective of anthropology. If I'm talking to my friends, for example, and we are trying to find books to read about secularism, we do not usually go for anthropological works to understand what secularism is. So, how do you go about this? What is the value in that, in discussing
I see.
Islam or secularism within anthropological
I see.
research?
Well, as I said, my story in anthropology started with the readings of Talal Asad. So I think it's a good starting point.
Yes, of course.
There wouldn't be a better starting point to start. And but of course, before my engagement with Talal Asad, and later I met him also in his house in New York, also face to face. I feel always disturbed when I read sources about Islam and Muslims. And I think it was too much associated with the whole question of Orientalism. So as someone who has this critical perspective, when I was reading about whether it was a newspaper, whether it was watching a movie, or whether it was my Turkish cinema or Hollywood or Bollywood, whatever, or whether it was a scholarly work, the ways in which Islam was addressed, the ways in which Muslims were described or investigated, has always disturbed me in many works, in many research. And this is, I think, something when I started to read Assad, I said, aha point, this is exactly what I have been thinking about.
Talal Asad's work on secularism and on religion.
And of course, other scholars on the way helped me also to map out the problems in academia, particularly in not only in the Western academia, but also in academia under the huge Western modernist impositions and hegemony in the Muslim societies as well.
Yes.
The scholarship that has been produced by so-called Muslim intellectuals itself was a self-orientalist, kind of production in most of the cases.
How so? If you can explain this, if you can elaborate on this point.
Well, so like and this is the point that I started to think about, that I have to teach, and I am thinking about sociology, anthropology of Islam, but I have to teach and learn and teach also how to engage with Islam and Muslim, how to study Islam and Muslims, and in this labor, what kind of methodological and theoretical tools we can use in order to understand Islam and Muslim societies in their own context. So while going into that direction, as I said, you will, when you read something, so you have a lot of ethnographic research about different on Muslims and Islam, and coming from different academic scholarly figures from different parts of the world. So when you start reading those ethnographic research or scholarly works, you see theoretical and methodological faults and Orientalist frameworks in these scholarly works that are completely wrong, that are completely problematic, which are resulting in distorted understanding of representation of Islam and Muslims. So that was something that you, as a Muslim, you feel a responsibility to address these issues in the literature. So I have a certain categorizations. For instance, when I do these readings, I put the Western scholarship as the first category. Those like Dale Eccleman or Ernest Gellner or um, Evans Pritchard or early period anthropologists and sociologists who have studied Islam and Muslims, like Clifford Geertz and many others, the ways in which they portrayed and investigated Islam and Muslims are, including too much problems, both theoretical and methodological. So that is like a kind of, in my personal understanding of the whole picture, is the first category. And in the second category, you have those Muslim, like people, Muslims from the Muslim countries, Muslim societies, who do their academic labor either in the Western institutions or national institutions, but a completely veiled self-orientalist perspective, using the same tools, theoretical and methodological tools, and false frameworks, problematic frameworks, in their labor of understanding Islam and Muslim, their own societies. So this is the second category, which is a very big one. Reproduction of the self-orientalist, neo-colonialist, conceptualizations, linguistically, theoretically, and ethnographically. And in the third category, I see the Muslim scholars, like practicing, I would say, Muslim scholars, who started to engage with academic and scholarly work with their own societies, who have this critical positionality, not only the Western early or current Western scholarship with self-orientalist, neo-colonialist frameworks, but also the secular or liberal or Marxist, literature from the Muslim societies and their labor of understanding the Muslim societies.
But at the same time, many of the scholars that are going against or trying to build their critique towards the hegemonist narratives are also using postmodernist and Marxist and other frameworks that also work against or to dismantle this hegemony. So where do you draw the line for yourself?
Well, this is a very, very critical question. And this is something that is used actually as a critique of Muslim scholarship.
How so?
Their in their relationality with postmodern theory or Marxist theory, as a kind of their utilization of those theories to criticize colonialism and Orientalism, etc.
Why would this be bad? Ali Shariati, for example,
So
is...
the point, well, Ali Shariati and Sayyid Qutb and Muhammad Iqbal earlier, this is something that I too much discuss in my social theory classes on contemporary period. You can, and this problem, this whole issue is bringing us to the whole question of the question of the knowledge and the sources of knowledge. In social sciences, as academic figures, how do we produce knowledge? What are the sources of knowledge? So this is the start of the question, actually, that has been highlighted not only by early Muslim intellectuals and scholars like Jamaluddin Afghani or Muhammad Abduh or later Muhammad Iqbal, Shariati, or Qutb, and etc. This was also popularized in late 70s, early 80s by Triple IT, which was led by Ismail
project
Raji
of
al-Faruqi.
Islamization of knowledge.
Exactly. So the point is, when you look at the Western academic orientation, experiment, experience, and rationality, reason are the main three kind of sources of the knowledge. But as a Muslim scholar and intellectual, you don't stop there. You have to include You have to include other sources of knowledge, which is the first one is revelation. So without revelation, to what extent you can analyze social phenomena. So this is bringing us, and the fourth one is intuition. Without intuition, so because in the history of the Islamic scholarship, revelation, intuition, and in the sixth category, dreams are seen also as sources of knowledge.
But
So,
this
and
can
this
be
is
looked at in a historical manner. How can we use such a thing today?
this is bringing us to the question of understanding of the social phenomena. So, when we look at the world, when we try to understand the world,
Okay.
you have to recognize that the way in which we try to understand the world is very secular.
Okay.
And the sources of knowledge also are secularized. The God is not there. So this is something that I discuss in my discussion. Have you ever thought about, we are talking about agency, right? The agency of humans. And with postmodern theory, we talk about agency of animals, even plants, objects, any living entity or not. So anthropology is beyond the classic genre to go over there and study a village and live amongst a group of people. That conventional, traditional anthropological investigation as a methodology still continues. But now it is beyond this. The whole world has been deeply influenced by COVID-19, a virus called COVID-19.
Absolutely.
So from a sociological and anthropological perspective, how do we interpret the agency of a virus in turning the whole order globally in different societies, economically, financially, politically, etc., etc. Or so in anthropological literature, we have been talking about the agency of animals, the agency of other figures, but no one is talking about the agency of God, Allah.
Because it sounds like a matter of faith, and that can lead us to discuss the whole issue of not including matters of
Something
faith
very
in our
practical
discussions.
in a Muslim's life, whether you are a professor or whether you are a worker, whether you are a media guy, whoever you are as a Muslim, at least five, if you are a practicing Muslim, 5 times a day you are asking help from Allah to involve in your life. You beg him, you ask him to help you when you have a hardship, when you have a difficulty in your life. So you asking him to act in your life, to be a part of your life. You make him as a part of your life. If he is not, right, you are not a true Muslim. He's with you. He observes you and he is with you. He is a part of our life. From a standard definition of an Islamic, theological foundation. Very simply. So, and how such entity is not a part of the social phenomena. So my point is the way in which we understand Islam and Muslim societies also is too much from the secular epistemic frameworks. And this is something that many of us actually are not aware of it. And this is something that I too much recognized when I look at the literature on Islam and Muslim societies. So that is why we need to we need to reconstruct a new vocabulary, a new methodology, or methodological tools in a new framework in order to understand Islam and Muslim societies. Otherwise, if we use this secular or secularized frameworks, we will always miss or lack something, and there will be gaps in
Well,
our
that
understanding of
absolutely.
that reality.
Yes, that takes me to a question in the way you designed your syllabus when it comes to something like social theory. Now, you studied social theory in your bachelor degree years, and I'm sure you have come across the pedagogy in Canada, and coming back here in Turkey to teach social theory, you have compiled a very interesting list of names, whether from the Western tradition or the Muslim or Eastern tradition. You have names like Franz Fanon, you have Edward Said, you have Hannah Arendt, you have Bell Hooks, but also you have added Iqbal, Shariati, and even Sayyid Qutb. Why do you think it's important to have this compilation? And at the same time, you also seem to advise students from the East and from the Arab world and from our parts of the world to read these Western names also.
First of all, one of the first things that I want to do, and what I'm trying to do, to push students into such an exposure of those scholars from the margins, because
Whether it's in the East or the West.
exactly. So I like those voices in the margins, and I think they have too much to say to us and to enlighten us. And on the other hand, my composition of those names is also lie out on the idea that I want my students to see and to understand every single scholar in his or in her context. And because and thirdly, when I am doing that composition, I want to go beyond this kind of white supremacist, I would say racist kind of frameworks, by inclusion of not only the voice of men but the voice of women and the voices of the intellectuals like black scholars and other scholars from Asia, in order to create that heterogeneous framework so I think this is something that also I too much gained from my oral history scholarship, to let them to speak in your class and hear their voices, what they tell you. So, and while doing this, I am trying to understand these critical voices in their scholarship and try to understand what kind of epistemic, political, ontological conditions and circumstances made them who they are. So as we talked about earlier, their life stories is too much associated with their scholarship as well. When you think about Du Bois, one of the pioneering, African American sociologists who is too much ignored in the history of sociology, or when you think about Frantz Fanon, or when you think about other scholars, you will not see Muslim voices, for instance, in any syllabuses on social theory, hardly in the Western universities and campuses, in sociology and anthropology departments. Slightly, you will see a soft touch about or on Ibn Khaldun, and that's all. So the point in this framework and applying such a framework is also too much associated to not only hear voices from the margins, but also to question the hegemony of so-called pluralism, because we are convinced that there is such pluralism, but there is not. It is a completely illusion what we have been taught. So it is an engagement to introduce also students, or to learn together. Not only this is not only an introduction or something, me imposing something. It is also something that I want to learn with my own students, that to what extent and how much we can look the social phenomena and different issues from an alternative perspective by utilizing those voices. To what extent we can learn from them, and to what extent we can walk with them.
Speaking of this, I actually have one of your students have sent us a message. He said, while we were preparing for this interview, he said, ask Professor Aras about the song Another Break in the Wall by Pink Floyd.
Yes.
What is this about? Apparently that's a reference to your classroom.
Exactly. Well, I might say that the way in which I organize my teaching is, I would say, is mostly from a critical perspective. You know, I am putting this troublemaking voices, theoreticians in the class, which are seen as voices from the margins, I would say. But and this is something I think generally some of my students are frustrated about it. What about this, or like Durkheim or Weber? I said, you go and learn about
the classical names.
Yeah. So because even when I put bell hooks, for instance, I remember one of the, can she be considered as a social terrorist, or like Sayyid Qutb, for instance? You have like a frustration of students. Is it real? Yes, it is real. Or Said Nursi, for instance. How Said Nursi can be present in a social theory
Yes,
class?
we are not used to perceive these names as social theorists.
So this is something nice that I like it when I see the frustration of the students. This is something that I enjoy it, because this is my intention actually.
To provoke them.
Exactly, like to provoke the students to think other ways, and going beyond this meta narratives on mainstream frameworks, and to think about alternative voices, alternative vocabularies, I would say, and how, to what extent we can utilize their theoretical conceptualizations that they have coined and produced, and to what extent they can help us to understand the present and to build the future. So
it's not just a matter of diversifying the syllabus. It's about those also from the margins, and those who have something to tell you about being in the margin.
Exactly. And the other thing that I am too much fascinated about while teaching at Ibn Khaldun University, for instance, is the voices that are coming from the margins. Students
Themselves.
It's a fascinating match.
How so?
The course and the students are a fascinating match. Most of the students are students from the margins. You know, from the post-colonial or neo-colonial countries, for instance, when you think about international students or even Turkish citizen students. I feel very lucky in that sense when I enter to such classes with these diverse backgrounds and with this critical backgrounds that students are coming from. So the
You mean in terms of geography?
The geography, and also the geography and disciplinary backgrounds as well. We are trying to keep that diversity within the university and within the department in order to create this prolific and rich environment to feed ourselves also, to learn, not only to teach, but also to learn from our students.
Which is very important to
It is-
talk about, because
it is
students have so
priceless.
much to bring.
It's too much.
Yes.
Ethnographically, theoretically, and experiences. Again, we learn from each other's experiences. So in that sense, we want to we want to go beyond conventional frameworks. It is the national education systems
Beyond the conventional classroom setting and syllabuses.
that we have been also trained through which, for the Turkish context, it is still completely secular.
And in other
That is
countries too, is the
very
the
similar
nationalist.
stories. So the classroom becomes a process of awareness, or a kind of self-revealing process of asking and trying to answer this question of who we are, or who am I.
Instead of being another brick in the wall.
Exactly. So it is like going beyond this so-called meta-narrative and try to look at things from a different perspective. This is something very interesting that I have been observing through my teaching performances. The similarity between the different pedagogical and the scholarly engagement of students that are coming from different countries. So to what extent the so-called liberal Western values and Orientalist and colonialist framework are globalized. So you see that global effect or reality of such setting also. When a student from West Africa speaks in your class, or when a student from South Asia speaks in your class, or when a student from Turkey or Middle East or North America speaks in your class, the similarity of experiences, pedagogic and epistemic, I would say, experiences of the students is shocking at certain level.
That we have so much in common we didn't even
Too
know
much,
about.
and it shows how this Eurocentric epistemic foundation
We're
is too
all
much
suffering from it.
globalized, and how much people who are coming from different geographies, from different ethnic and racial
They
backgrounds,
still have been
are
affected by it.
suffering from the same tool. One of example, for instance, when I talk about Du Bois and the idea of double consciousness, why I see the same reaction and the same kind of a kind of enlightening process from a student from Algeria, but student from the Philippines, or student from India, or student from Liberia.
They can all relate to this.
How they feel the same way.
Yeah.
It's very strange, and it is fascinating to see the similar patterns in their experiences, and to what extent they have been alienated epistemically and politically and ontologically, and in such an experience, I feel very lucky to be a part of this collective togetherness and like a collective awareness process. Each time when I talk, when I teach, when we talk about these issues in our classrooms, in our seminars, I feel the similar feeling, that the commonality in the context of the epistemic suffering in different parts of the world.
Professor,
And the value of this decolonial kind of foundation, and to what extent the urgent need for this provincializing of this whole Eurocentric paradigm, and to what extent we can produce a labor together, and become a part of a new initiative that can be expanded beyond our campus and by inclusion of people from different parts of the world as well.
That sounds really lovely. I have a question about your own design for the syllabus for social theory, but what advice would you give for the public and not just the students in your classroom about the names and the books that they should go and look for and read and familiarize themselves with?
It's a tough job, first of all. This is something that we discuss too much in the classroom. The starting point is awareness, but how you are aware of what the hell is going on, how you are sure, or how you make yourself that you are sure that you are aware of the malaise, you are aware of the complexity of the problem. So we are speaking a language that is not our own. We are reproducing a sets of vocabulary that is not our own.
Yeah.
We are reading different sources that are provided to us without a critical engagement. So maybe from a methodological perspective, I think maybe the first thing is that to deconstruct what we have in hand. So without a deconstruction, it will be very difficult to come to such a point of awareness. So the first task is a deconstruction, and how the deconstruction of the epistemic foundations and tools and methods that we are using as Muslim intellectuals. The vocabulary that we are using, for instance, are we deconstructing it? What is coming from where? So I think for every single Muslim intellectual or young students or scholars, this is the first task, and this is the first job to do.
To reflect on
Every single thing that we have, that we take as granted,
for granted. Yeah.
And
where does it come from?
Like when you think about the whole question of racism, when you think about the whole question of Orientalism, we as Muslim thinkers and scholars, even those of us who claim that they are critical, they are, in most of the cases, they are falling into those gaps or traps and reproducing such a language, reproducing this meta-narratives, reproducing this Eurocentric frameworks. So maybe the first step, in order to have a better foundation in the later period, the first step is to scrutinize what we are doing really. Everything that we are doing, to put it into a question. And we need to do this not as an individual endeavor, but we have to do this as a collective labor.
To be
together.
Actively mindful of where are our sources coming from, and what are we reading, what are we discussing, our own language, our own vocabulary.
And in order to do this, you have to answer those questions. What is Orientalism? What is nationalism? What is racism? 3 cases. And then the next set of questions: am I racist? Am I Orientalist? Am I nationalist?
All right.
Real self-critique. Or am I using or reproducing discourses or applying certain representations in my scholarly or as a normal human being in everyday life, am I reproducing such thing? I think everybody has to reflect on himself and herself and make some confessions. Without confessions, without self-critique or self-reality, I have my own experiences as someone claiming to be a professor of sociology and professor, and how sometimes someone who claims to be critical in everyday life, how sometimes we feel weak and we fall into those traps and reproduce certain vocabularies or discourses. We have our own experiences because of the fact that we are living under the unbelievable, enormous, hegemonic foundations of those discourses. Racism, Orientalism, Eurocentrism, it is secularism, it is everywhere. We are completely occupied. There is an intellectual, mental occupation. We are occupied. And you need to address and recognize to what extent, to what level are we occupied mentally, psychologically. We talk about emotions.
Yes.
To what extent my emotions, my feelings are my own.
You also discuss emotions on a societal level.
Very
in some of your
seriously,
works.
the way
Pain
in
and
which
fear and-
I express my happiness, the way in which I express my fear, the way in which I perform my suffering, to what extent they are my own, really. The language that I am using, the performative aspects that I am using, to what extent they are Muslim, they are mine, really. So we really need our consumption patterns, our mental setting, the way in which we think, the ways in which we think itself is dichotomic, is Cartesian, it is this, it is that. So that is why
even when it comes to the lines between the East and the West, for example, it is
that vocabulary itself is problematic. Where is the East? Where is the West? You know, like I am in some of my classes, I am using Muhammad al-Idrisi's cartographic imagination of the world map, for instance. And then you have this Australian geographer's upside down world map, for instance. It is enlightening, really. Where is South? Where is North? Where is East? Where is West?
mental
How you
categories.
determine this? We use the notion of the Middle East, for instance, as a taking granted. The naming politics. We are named even. We are named, and we are reproduced those naming
We are
strategies.
named and then problematized as a whole category in the
Exactly.
Middle East.
So that is why the language and the vocabulary that we are using itself has to be questioned. And as I said, methodologies has to be re-questioned. How you study a social phenomenon, for instance, what kind of tools are you incorporating into your research? How you are looking a social phenomenon. When you look at an event as a sociologist, as an anthropologist, as a psychologist, how do you approach the social problems?
I have a very personal question at the end.
Okay.
And, you know, after the Arab Spring, and across my generation, many of us have looked for answers in academia. And many of us have embarked on a journey to understand more, to question things more, to build a more profound understanding of what is happening, why it is happening, and what can be done. Recent events sometimes make one doubts and questions the limitations that scholarly engagement actually have. Sometimes it doesn't feel enough. Sometimes scholarly engagement does not feel like it matters when you see what's happening to people that look like me, people that speak my language, people that have my religion, people that, and you see yourself in that, and you see the dehumanization, you see war machines working behind what is happening. Sometimes you see scholarly engagement as little. In times like these, what keeps you going? What revives your faith in scholarly engagement?
I see. First of all, again, this is something that is too much related to what we have been talking about, the idea of objective and objectivism. I never ever believed such thing,
That there is
and
no objectivity.
and
Exactly.
I do believe that such thing never ever exists in social sciences.
Objectivity.
Exactly.
Or,
So you have to start from that point. Every single scholar has his or her own side. This is what I have learned from the beginning. Nobody is objective. Everybody has his or her own side. We have just have seen the statement of the Habermas
yes.
and taking the Israeli Zionist position.
Yes.
But I wasn't surprised personally. I have my doubts always for Habermas, for instance. Long stories. But
Of course.
the point is we are taught and we are convinced that there is such something that's called objectivity, that you have to be objective. If you get out of the campus and engage with the people, that is called activism. And if you are engaging in activism or as a public intellectual, you are not academic anymore. So the game itself is set again by this Eurocentric foundation,
But
in
then
spite of the fact that
even
they have been serving to the hegemons,
yes,
in spite of the fact that themselves have been serving the oppressor
as an institution,
as an institution, as individuals also.
because we have seen what's happening in Western
the history
academia
of sociology
recently.
and anthropology is full of figures who are directly working with intelligence services,
Yes.
right? Even Pritchard, one of the leading figures of the British anthropological tradition, was completely working with the British intelligence service in the whole colonization of the North Africa. So the point is, such thing. So if you position yourself as an intellectual, depending on such frameworks, this is how you are going to feel hopeless.
All right.
And disappointed.
If you have expectations,
Exactly.
you will be disappointed.
I don't feel disappointed.
Just do the job.
I don't feel hopeless in that sense. As a Muslim intellectual, as a Muslim scholar, I have a different direction and vision on what to do and how to do. So, and if you don't have this, and if you are not connected with the real people, you are declaring your death as an academic.
You will
also.
not have a
You
reason
don't
to
exist.
carry on.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You built your own career. Then what? Then what? So, as I stated earlier, you have to have a mission and vision in your scholarly work. So, which takes you to the point of activism, not just someone located in a sterile university campus and discussing this and that in your ivory tower, to be connected with the people, with the real people in everyday life, as someone a part of that society, which you are. You have this, there is that danger of alienating yourself from the people, also from your own people, and positioning yourself in a kind of hierarchical framework, in an upper level. This is another danger of the academia, which many people are doing this. So we need to have this public engagement, which is the nature of our work as a sociologist. Even wording itself sounds to me strange. Public engagement. You are among
You
the
are
people.
part of the
You
public.
are a part. You are
a
one of
normal
them.
person. Yes.
Like the wording itself to me is very strange itself. I am from there. I am not here and there. Dichotomy itself is problematic.
The fact that you have to go out there and engage is telling you that you have been isolating yourself.
But this is a Eurocentric framework out of the veranda, being that the whole Malinowskian, discourse. It's the whole story is problematic. The Muslim Islamic scholarly tradition completely has a different framework in that sense. So university campuses, or the whole idea of university, should be restructured in that sense, not something that is being detached from the society, something within the society.
Absolutely.
So this is what drives me more, and my pioneering figures generally have been this voices in the margins, which is very apparent from my teaching, syllabuses and cohorts. I think that is the passion that comes from there, and this is not a kind of pure, I would say, activism, a humanistic activism.
Right.
I always claim and openly state my position as a Muslim wherever I go. It is epistemically and ontologically and politically, it is who am I,
and it should be accepted as
exactly.
it is.
So you have this binary opposition, being religious and being like secular,
religious, non-religious, or religious, secular.
I was asked many times the possibility of being religious and being academic. How is that possible?
That if you are religious, you cannot be objective.
So that secular, dominant, hegemonic framework marginalizes you with that identity that they are not compatible. That give you this idea that both identity. No, you are an academic figure and you are religious also. So in that sense, I am not taking this idea of responsibility for the other from an humanistic perspective. I take this feeling and this idea from my Islamic understanding of my religious understanding of the Islam. So having that feeling and having that idea and prioritizing this, I think, is the most important drive that keeps me going, and not giving up and not losing my hope, because it is a farce on us to not lose our hope. So we keep our hope for a better future, we keep our hope for raising awareness, and we keep our hope to work harder and harder in order to expand that circle of awareness. I think this is, as a human being and also as a Muslim, I see this as a responsibility, and one of the main purpose of the whole academia, to be in academia. Otherwise, you can go and do other businesses and make money and have your own living. But no, academia for all humanity, academia for building justice for everyone.
All right.
And I think in today's context, observing a genocide happening in front of our eyes, seeing, I work on violence, I work on state, I work on emotions, and seeing such cruelty happening in front of our eyes without really not doing anything, and to prevent the occurrence of that genocide in Palestine makes you frustrated, of course. But in my personal case, if you look at my previous scholarly engagements, I don't feel that much surprised because I have seen and I have studied and I have read about similar atrocities and genocides in human history. This is a new episode, but this new episode is happening live. We watch it.
Yes.
We watch. This is something new about the genocide happening in Gaza. Everybody globally is watching a genocide happening, streamed in social media.
Which can be more surprising and more saddening that everybody is watching. This is not a historical event we are reading about and having to engage in acknowledging and fighting against those who are denying it. This is something that is happening right now in front of everyone.
I think this is a breaking point in world history. The world is not the same and will never be the same after October 7. And academia will not be the same. We are attending international conferences, meetings here and there, okay? On which ground are we going to talk about human rights?
Exactly.
On which ground are we going to talk about ethics?
Yes.
I am on the board of ethics for the research.
Yes. Or white
University.
academics talking about decoloniality.
So everything is losing its meaning. They are just meaningless.
Yes.
They are meaningless due to their so-called claims to build something, to do something for. So that is why this is a breaking point. And from this breaking and through the blood of the martyrs, I think something new is arising. Socially, politically, and epistemically, something new is borning. From now on, we have to talk about ethics in a different framework. We have to talk about human rights. We have to talk about justice from a completely different framework. And this is not a recognition and awareness that is happening in the mind and in the heart of the Ramazan Aras. This question is being asked everywhere on the streets.
Yes.
You don't have to be a sociologist, an anthropologist ask these questions. Ordinary people are asking the same questions.
Yes.
Where is justice? So we have been talking about hypocrisy of the European or North American or those hegemonic powers. It is not hypocrisy anymore. They are just blindly, visibly doing it in front of your eyes.
Yes.
So that is why I feel lucky, of course you feel sad about the death of all these innocent people.
Of course.
But then you recognize that these people are martyrs, which give you it's a kind of
Solace.
relief. Yeah. But on the other hand, I feel also lucky to observe, to be a witness, a shahid of this historical moment. This destruction, the fall of it's like the fall of the wall. Things are just falling down, and you are seeing more and more openly.
You can see things clearly.
It's like an
now.
eye-opening, but epistemically, politically, ontologically, and I think this is a new era that not only countries and political figures, but also societies and also academics, everybody is going to relocate and reposition themselves in this new world order. This is how I understand and how I observe it.
Well, on that amazing note, I Thank you very much for coming today, and it has been lovely talking to you.
It's my pleasure. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. It has been my honor on a very personal level.
Thanks a lot.
And to many others to come, inshallah.
Yeah, alhamdulillah. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
It was my pleasure to be here.
Thank you.